I welcome you all again for the panel discussion session 1. We have here all the panelists and the chair of the session. And now I request Dr. A. Nageshwar Rao. He is a faculty in the Department of Political Science at Maulana Azad National Urdu University, who will moderate this session to join at the dais. I also request Professor Vinod K. Jairat, sir. Please join on the dais. Professor Jairat will be chairing the session. He was formerly with the Department of Sociology at University of Hyderabad. We have Dr. Prashant Kumar Ken from English and Foreign Language University. He teaches in the Department of Exclusion Studies. And we also have Dr. R. Thirunavukarasu from Department of Sociology. Thiruda, please come on from University of Hyderabad. We had third speaker, Professor Asim Prakash, but he's suffering from COVID, and morning he was unable to talk properly. So maybe I'll try connecting if he is able to join online. Otherwise, we have two panelists. Now I hand over this session to Dr. Nageshwar Rao to take over this.
Once again, good morning, and I welcome you all the dignitaries and participants for this session. So this session is having a special and unique relevance in the context of India at 75. Yes. Without wasting much time, so I would like to read out about this session important dignitaries. First of all, Professor, I will brief about Professor Vinod Kumar Jairat. Professor Vinod Kumar Jairat, he was a well-known and eminent scholar on this area. So he doesn't need much introduction because he is having so many reputations as a professor at the University of Hyderabad. So his recent book, Frontiers of Embedded Muslim Communities in India, New Delhi, London, Routledge. In 2011, it was published. And the second one is Studying Communal Rights in India, Some Methodological Issues, in Sociological Bulletin, Social Movements, and Agenda for Science Studies in India, In Search of Roots, the Indian Scientific Community. So these are the recent publications. And next important panelist, Professor Asim Prakash, who is going to shortly join online. Let me brief about Professor Asim Prakash. Professor Asim Prakash is a professor of public policy, School of Public Policy and Governance, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Hyderabad campus. Third panelist is one of the important close associate from IFLU, Dr. Prashant Kumar Kane, who is currently working at Department of Social Exclusion Studies at IFLU, English and Foreign Languages University. Dr. Kane has acquired his bachelor's degree in Korean language with history, political science, and sociology, and earned his master's degree in sociology from JNU, Delhi. Has done MPhil, PhD from the Center of Social Medicine and Community Health. So his recent publications, apart from many publications, one of the important and recent publication is Caste, Labor and History, the Leather Workers of Agra during the colonial period, Knowledge, Culture and Caste, Politics of Knowledge, Production in India, Religion, Representation and the Politics, Reservation, Critical Reflections, Caste and Social Mobility in India, Conceptual and Theoretical Considerations in Quota Politics, Local Demand, more. The fourth panelist of this session is that is none other than Dr. R. Tirunavakkarasu, teaches in the Department of Sociology at the University of Hyderabad. He also taught sociology at Jamia Millia Islamia before he joins in the later he joined in Loyola College, Chennai for a long period before joining SU. He is an alumni of JNU by doing Masters, MPhil and PhD from the university. A very active and dynamic academic, one of the active and dynamic academicians in the area of sociology. So Dr. Thiru remains committed working in the area of caste, ethnicity, identity theory. His current interest of research is nation and nationalism, political sociology of caste, and social movements. With this, I would like to invite Professor Vinod Kumar Jairat sir to speak on. He is also chairing the session. Yes, please come.
Thank you so much. I'm really pleased because after a long time, after my retirement, I sort of got out and decided to come and participate in this very important seminar. You call it workshop? Dialogue. Okay. Yes, I actually want to react immediately to Professor Thorat's talk. I was listening to that, and the terminology that he was using. He said, Muslim is poor, Muslim is uneducated, Muslim as a homogenized category, which implies that there is some standard Muslim. Right? This is a question of all groups. There was a time when some of the groups were more or less homogeneous, right? But so much has changed in our society. So first thing is that we recognize the fact that there are many differences within the community. That Muslim is not a standard, right? Because this is how then stereotypes are created. Muslim is backward. Similarly, you can use this for other categories as well. I remember when I was talking about the differences within Muslims at our department, one of my colleagues said, if you talk like this, then the category of Muslim disappears. There is nothing like Muslim then. Then you will talk about subcategories within them. And my response was that it is exactly the same with the category women, right? What stereotypes? Women are, let us say, backward looking. Women are timid, right? Some people would say women should be taught a lesson immediately after marriage, so that they remain subdued. Or somebody would say women are subdued. No. In women's studies, then right from the beginning, women's movements, the black women came forward and they said, but we are not like this. What you are describing is white women. Black women are different. What about educated women and uneducated women? What about working women and housewives? Right? When you analyze them, they have very different characteristics. But at the same time, there are certain problems and issues when the category women becomes important. When it is a question of women as opposed to men. But this is not a permanent category, right? It's not that women are permanently at war with men or vice versa. Right? There are different situations. And similarly, with the category Muslims, and I would imagine with the category Dalits also. The second point, when we talk about status of Muslims or status of Dalits or status of women, right, I sensed, I may be wrong, I'm sure I'm wrong, but I sensed as though these are static situations, as though nothing has been changing for the last 75 years. Right? So much has changed, right? And it has changed for different subgroups. Right? I think if we look at Dalits, there will be regional variations, right? Same thing with Muslims, there are regional variations. They vote differently, right, in their respective regions. There are subcategories, like you also know probably. I'm talking more about Muslims because I have done little bit of work. Scholars have argued that when you talk about Muslims, we may not recognize it so much in Hyderabad, but in North India, it is important that there are Ashraf and there are Pasmanda, right? Their issues are different, right? Their status is different. Their political contestation is different, right? Their understanding of politics is different. Right? So if we really want to understand these issues, I think we do need to see there are situations, I'm saying, like in case of women, there are situations where Muslims in a society like ours becomes a very important category, a unified category. There are those moments. But there are moments where you have to see different groups within them. We know the emergence of middle classes, what kind of middle class and what kind of discrimination then. Only then we can see, not without specifying this thing. Okay? So one, that these are differentiated communities and one should recognize. And secondly, it's not that we are living in a changeless world, right? There are constant changes. And if we want to do the mapping, like in your project, if you want to do the mapping of Dalits, of Muslims, of women, of all these categories, then you have to see how things have changed, right? How things have been changing. If I say, for example, that the educational level is only, let us say, 40%, right? That is one kind of statement. The level of education in this group is only 40%. But one would like to see that when we started, was it 23%? Was it 7%? Was it 2%? And from that, we have moved to 44%. Will it increase? Is it stuck? What kind of obstructions are there? What kind of discriminations are there? Has the nature of discrimination changed? Is it the same kind of discrimination? Right? Is there violence? What kind of violence? Right? In different segments of life. So I think we need to take these into account if we want to understand, whether you call it status today in 2022, how has it come about of different groups within these communities, and where is it going, and what are the obstacles in this, in achieving equality, right? I think I can stop here and you can then carry on with the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir. Now, may I invite Asim Prakash sir is not joining. Okay. So, now, may I now invite Dr. Prashant Kumar Kain to speak about the theme.
Thank you so much for giving me opportunity to speak to you. I'm thankful to my friend Zia, Department of Economics and IIDS for for letting me share my views. Now, as we know that we are discussing, Professor Jayarath has already complicated. In fact, he has brought out many theoretical and methodological issues while we are taking certain things for granted. Objectified categories which have been created, and we, like in economics, we, which is actually the pure sciences of social sciences, which also has the status of that. Now we are in this session, which is also very important, socio-economic status of Dalits in India. So whether Professor Jayarath has already talked about whether reality itself is stagnant or it is dynamic. Definitely reality is dynamic and things are constantly moving. So we have to capture the reality in its dynamism. And this is something that is very, very important. Now, as far as as far as the concern of Dalits is concerned, they constitute approximately 16% of the population. And if we take the objective methodology, we find they are, although they are 16% of the total population, but they are disproportionately represented at different levels of work in the economy across different sectors and industries and segments. It is largely the informal work, casual work, temporary work. So while we see that if we have to understand Dalit, we have to be very focused about the agency which has created Dalit, and we have to go into the history, the ideology of gradedness, the ideology of gradedness which continues to determine the experiences of Dalits even today. And this is something that is manifested if we make a study the kind of labor that Dalits provide, because they have been historically prevented from owning resources. So we find that a large disproportionate percentage of Dalits are dependent on their labor. They did not own, they are dependent on their labor. And where are the, within the economy, we make a mapping of the economy, where are they located? They are largely located in the casual work, the dangerous work, or those work which are not done by, or which is not done by or preferred by anybody. So largely we find them as a category of workers. They are largely found in the bottom of economic activities across sectors, across industries, and across industrial works. What we see is that those who are located at the bottom in social hierarchy, they are also located at the bottom in industrial hierarchy in India. And when we are saying they are located at the bottom in the industrial hierarchy, the kind of work that they are doing, how this caste is getting reproduced, Like in keynote, Professor Thorat was asking about how inequalities persist because the ideology never left. The ideology of gradedness always present. And when Dalits are trying to move out of it, it is always forcing them in their own status, the fixed status which is being imposed on them. Now let's see. Let's let's see. And when we are talking about the status of Dalits, let's move out. What is the status of Dalit in the organized sector? Even after, this is quite an irony that after 70 more than 75 years, we are still discussing the status of Dalits. It is quite irony that Dalits, Ambedkar published his Annihilation of Caste in 1936. The idea of annihilating caste, it has been more than 90 years. The very idea of caste, annihilation of caste from the society itself has vanished. Now, this is also another kind of inequality which has come to. Now, everyone is talking about the democratic distribution of caste resources. But no one is talking about annihilating caste anymore. So this has also brought another dimension, that over a period of time, whether there is an expansion of the public sphere in terms of issues, or if there is a shrinkage of public sphere, the kind of issues that Periyar could speak or Ambedkar could speak, can we speak those issues now? Is it possible? No, it is not possible. So which means there is a, over a period of time, there is a shrinkage of public sphere, the kind of issues that we discuss. Now, if you see the organized sector, even after 75 years, we have not been able to, Dalits have not been able to reach to their proportionate representation in public sphere, which is public sector, which is also a protected sector. Even to after 75 years, you see that they have not been able to reach to their 60% of the proportion. What it actually indicates? It indicates actually two things. Either there is a discrimination, or there is a development deficit in among these groups. Both of these arguments cannot be correct at the same time. If Dalits after 75 years have not been able to reach to their proportion representation, it means there is a continued discrimination against them in the public sector itself. Now, well, let's go to the unorganized sector, and how the state itself is a very important agent when we are talking about the marginal groups. So we are seeing a complex situation where state is also trying to include people. At the same time, it is also playing a very dubious role of excluding them. So though the process, inclusion and exclusion, happening simultaneously. Let me give one very classic example. As far as Dalits and Muslims are concerned, leather work is one of the most important works. It is one work which has been historically, Dalits and Muslims have been historically associated. And over a period of time, what has happened is that the same Varna hierarchies have also developed into the leather work. So you see a different kind of terrain where there was leather work which was exclusively done by the Muslims and Dalits. Now, if you see today, what is the status of them? They have reduced to the status of workers in their own historical occupation. And how it has happened? On the one hand, state has been doing or making policies by which it trying to include, or at least pretending to include them. On the other hand, it is also weakening their economic base. And now, what has happened? If you read the history a little more deeply, then you'll find that the process itself has started in the 60s itself. During aggressive industrialization and urbanization, different state passed Kshetriya Samiti Act or Jila Parishad Acts. Now, what is the meaning of this act? These acts define the territory of how much time I have, sir?
Yeah, you can have another 5-6 minutes.
So the territory itself defined the municipal territory of. Now, any animal dies in that territory, that becomes the property of a state. It does not remain the property of the Dalits or the Muslims. So you see a gradual, the policy, the municipal acts change the relationship of Dalits and Muslims with their own trade, on their own occupation. They became dependent. They rather became dependent on the upper caste. Earlier, they had the autonomy. They had the independence to decide this work. And moving forward, that the 60s itself led to the urbanization and industrialization, led to actually the disempowerment of the Dalits and Muslims. So if you see, who are the first victim of liberalization in India? It started with the Dalits and Muslims. And the classical example is leather industry. Now you move forward in the 70s, and you see the works of the various commissions and committees, which led to the commercialization of leather, which led to the entry of upper caste in this leather work, organized work. And the process itself started with the recommendation of Sita Ramaiah Committee in 1972, where the committee recommended 18 recommendations. Out of that, 18, 17 were accepted. Now, what you see over a period of time, the state has always has played such a role, such a complicated, such a dubious role. On the one hand, it is trying to, at least pretending to show that it is including people, or making the benefit of privileges democratic distributed. On the same hand, it is also doing their, through policies, it is also doing work by which the economic base of Dalits and Muslims is eliminated. So you see a very, very complex example, that when Thorat sir was saying that why inequality persists. Inequalities persist because there is a reproduction of inequality in the everyday life. Exclusion and inclusion going hand in hand. At the same time, you are seeing that why Dalits continue to be poor. If you see the proportion of Dalits in Indian economy, 85.5% are marginal and landless. And when, because they are marginal and landless, their only source of survival is basically labor. Now, what kind of labor they do? If you see the mapping of the occupations or the processes where they are located, you see largely they are involved in seasonal work, which is fluctuating work, temporary work, casual work, which is not able to give them a stability in terms of income and livelihood. Another major important why these inequalities are keep producing itself is that if you see the kind of work they do, these work are dangerous. If you see the economy, in the economy, who are the people who do the hazardous work? For example, who do the sanitation work? Who are the people who are doing involved in the stone crushing work? Who are the people who are involved in mineral extraction work? Who are the people? They are basically Dalits and Adivasis. They are located because they are located in the bottom of social hierarchy, so they are also located at the bottom in industrial hierarchy. And these kind of occupation, you have the high rate of accidents, high rate of mortality, high rate of morbidity. So whatever you are, at the same time your income is unstable, at the same time the added expenditure on health push you towards further poverty. So what you are largely see is that so what you are largely seeing is that when we are seeing why inequalities persist in the economy, inequality persists because it is continuously reproduced across different segments, across different sectors, across industries. And this is where a very important issue is that what as a creator of knowledge, what should be our role, or to intervene in that, to expose. Like, for example, economists will not say about, they will always use very different terminologies. I would say rather the Brahmanical area of knowledge production has pushed huge mass of people beyond the subhuman conditions. There has been some improvement, we are not saying that there has not been improvement, but the ideology continuously pushing, and it persists and continuously pushing to a large vast mass of people in subhuman condition. So I think I don't have much time, but thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Prasantji. Now, may I request Dr. Dr. R. Tirunavarakkarasu, please come and speak.
Thank you, friends. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks, Zia. Thanks, friends. Thanks, Professor Vinod Jairat. Let me start with some simple, elementary level questions. Why inequality persists? Is there any country without any inequality? No, inequality will be there. But is it easy for some people to overcome that unequal structure? It's not possible, or is it possible? Where it is possible, or where it became possibility, where it is not a possibility. That's the second question, isn't it? A simple question: if some injustice is taking place, so will you remain silent? We will not. Rather, we will resist. Understand? But somehow we have been told a methodological question that here is a structure which has been imposed from above, and for the last several decades, several millennia, for 2000 years, we have obsession with numbers. 2000 years, 2500 years. Jo man mein aaya, so we keep on talking about it. Please, we are social scientists. We have to come out with certain amount of objectivity. Understand? It's not grandmother's bedtime story. History is not, certainly. No, social science is definitely not. So nothing can be imposed and which can survive. Understand? And please remember, oh, this country is a oriental despotic society where the mode of production did not change for donkey centuries. That is not only untenable proposition, this is a historical fallacy. This society was a dynamic society. It was not a despotic society. It had certain amounts of despotism. That is global phenomena. Not only this country, all countries are. Therefore, this country had certain amount of inequality that was not imposed. To be very explicit, caste is not necessarily an imposed category. Rather, it is an evolved category. So let us not involve in some kind of a conspiracy theory. Somebody has come with AK-47 and imposed, and we are all silent for the last 2000 years. Aren't we fools? Tell me. And on top of that, we are blaming our own forefathers for being so insensitive or aloof. No, it's not like that. It's not that easy. That is not rush to some conclusions. If it is evolved category, what was the condition for which it has evolved? Why it is surviving for too long? If it is nothing but a tyrannical structure, nothing but it is exploitative structure, caste, no doubt about it. But if it is nothing but exploitation, why it is surviving? Will you tolerate something which is irritating in your body? We don't. But why do we allow something to? That means it has got some more purpose to say. Understand? So rather, we need to have certain kind of a perspective. I'm very careful about my caveat. We need to have certain kind of perspectives which has to be inherently scientific rather, instead of getting into a kind of a pejorative or a kind of a conspiracy theories. So please, this is my first humble request. Why caste is surviving too long? It has got something more to say. And moreover, it is not an imposed, it is evolved. Why people have come together to form a category called caste? How, to what extent it is helping or it is not helping some people? There are hundreds of such questions, basic questions we need to ask ourselves. Number one. Two, it is nothing but a tyrannical structure. It has become worse or it has become better. Now, this is a simple question, but awaits precise answer. The reason is actually we thought, oh, state in this country after 1947 is unable to provide a kind of a freedom for the all the suppressed caste, subaltern communities and things like that. Market is the best solution. Market will liberate all of us. Turn out to be a disaster now. Market, as he has correctly pointed out, there are many studies are available, easily accessible to all of you people. Market has in fact worsened the situation. Why market is worsened the situation? Why market has empowered the already empowered? Why market has in this country has wrecked the system, particularly for the marginalized communities further? That means capital does not come alone. Capital comes with its own paraphernalia. It comes with McDonald's. It comes with Pepsi, Coke, vagera, and things like that. Not only for consumer product, it comes with certain culture. What is that culture? Why that particular culture is in fact preventing us from moving up or creating some kind of a resistance? Why suddenly, if you are resisting it, for example, big dams, we know very well it is not actually helping, empowering the vast majority of subaltern masses. The rehabilitation process is not over in many dams constructed in the 50s. But today, none other than topmost what we call it, the executive head of the government of India is saying that urban Nakshals were preventing Sardar Sarovar Dam project for a long period. If it is displacing millions of people, if it is preventing you from rehabilitating those people, and their resistance has become urban Nakshalism, you understand? A new vocabulary they have invented. So therefore, friends, what is important is actually market has made many people more vulnerable, and more vulnerability has led to total disempowerment, and this disempowerment in a way prevented them from resisting it, because the empowered people have become more draconian, because suddenly they have acquired disproportionate power and wealth and authority. Who will let it go? So rather, we become more and more casteist in the recent past. I'm not saying caste has become suddenly invented by somebody else. Caste is always there. but we become more caste-based and more communal over a period of time. Understand? So be it caste, be it religion, be it ethnic identities, language, or other things, become an ideology. And this ideological component has further consolidated under the so-called liberalized economic era. So therefore, the contentious point is why there is a head politics, why there is a Brahminical attitude. It's easy to say that these are the reasons, 1, 2, 3, 4. But the going deep into the root of the problem is actually somewhere else we have flawed. Our socialist pretensions have led to regimentation, license raj, vagera vagera. And our intention to liberalize our economy, to create a liberal economic order, turned out to be a disaster, and it created chronic capitalism. Understand? By drawing, but rather taking loans, somebody has become millionaire or a billionaire globally. Is it possible somewhere else? These are fictitious things. Understand? Or all kinds of hypocrisy has been given to you as a template for a progressive society. Friends, let us be critical about even caste. Therefore, the third point is actually resisting caste or caste discrimination is the most important thing. Annihilating caste sounds very interesting, but I'm afraid that people are not interested in annihilating caste. People are more interested in challenging dominant caste. The idea is dominance. The idea is discrimination. The idea is exclusion. The idea is, by teacher's language, idea is humiliation. Understand? So therefore, what actually compels people to take it as a, or rather consider this as a normal, is the interesting point. So therefore, how market in the last 30 years has empowered people to humiliate others as if it is a normal thing. How market in the over a period of time has in fact emboldened people to discriminate others and consider that as a normal. These are the issues, in my opinion, we need to pay attention to. And more interesting thing is, market is not a final solution. Rather, it has aggravated some of our old problems, and it will continue to do that. It will make us, as I said, culture and capital are two sides of the same coin. So when you invite culture, as invite capital, it will come with its own paraphernalia, and that will make you more and more insecure. So therefore, the quote-unquote majority is actually suffering from a minority syndrome, isn't it? Is it logical to think of a vast majority having certain insecurity? Why it is so? There are this doesn't happen so easily. It has to have certain context, and the context in the last 30 years is our notion of liberalized economy, and that liberalized economy hasn't actually empowered the people. Don't get carried away by the fringe benefits of it. Oh, there are plenty of foreign cars are there, you have so many outlets are there, in orbit mall, that mall, this mall, all these things people will come out, you understand. But you please check how caste has been reaffirmed within the new structure, and who are the people who have been hired for it. I remember long time ago when a new hostel was created, when we were students, me, Zia were students, we had a very interesting vice chancellor, eminent economist. He suggested, no, let me give double salary for the sanitation workers. New hostel for cooks, this much is salary. For sanitation workers, let us give the double salary so that other people can also apply. Nobody applied. Nobody applied. People from the same caste has actually historically known communities involved in scavenging. They only applied for it, and he was pretty upset. He said, "This is the reality. This reality is predominantly culture oriented, not money oriented. Still, we have our own undisputed sacred culture is determining most of our economic activities. So therefore, please, and that kind of understanding is reinforced again and again, because this capital, or rather the so-called capital that we have received in the last 30 years, this is chronic capitalism, and this chronic capitalism will further ensure caste inequality in this country. So therefore, fighting against caste discrimination, humiliation, or exclusion, where is the root cause? The root cause is a chronic capitalism. Therefore, my appeal is actually, let us devise mechanisms how to resist this chronic capitalism and its onslaught. I hope you can come out with your own wonderful ideas. I'm willing to listen to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Yeah, ideal, sir. Thank you so much, sir. So now, house is open for certain questions. Any kind of question, please raise your concerns and questions. Thank you.
Today's India, asking questions is most important. Very, very important. So please exercise whatever rights we are still left with. Yes.
Yeah, we have a rights in constitution, but in implementation, I don't have a rights, because recently in Hyderabad, I went to search for a house. The people are showing the house. Finally, they are saying I visited 110 houses in one area per house. 106 people. They said we don't give you a house for Dalit, Christians, and Muslims. Openly said. This is in Hyderabad only. Yeah, not just common. We see the people, there are bank employees where they said, we don't give you the house. There is business people are there and the traditional people are there. Some of the people directly we don't give you. They are not interested to show their house. This is the tragedy. And they 90% of the people are non-vegetarians, but we were not allowed to eat beef. So this is the tragedy. And in India, where we are going, so what we are eating, somebody is deciding. My question is, rights for all or rights for somebody only? This needs to be discussed, I think. Thank you.
Any other questions? At this stretch, we'll take all the questions and panelists will respond. Any other questions from young research scholars community?
I think the Professor Jayarata has rightly said that things have to be seen into the perspective of that they are not homogeneous. For example, Muslims as well as Dalits also. Dalits case, we can see that in South and North, you have studied about leather industry in Lucknow. Leather industry is there in Hyderabad also. Anjumane, Charam, they have Muslims are dominant there. But now there is no rate for this what you call goat skin and all. Particularly, it's a big business during Bakrid. No, no one is coming to take that. Even it's not costing 1 rupee. The whole value has become zero because it is again related to what Tirunavakkaru sir has said. The economy is controlled by people who are not the linked with the work. They're not rooted in the labor. So as long as it is rooted with the labor, that is the Dalits used to collect this and Muslim used to polish this and get into this. Now when particularly this liberalization, instead of liberalizing these what you call caste things, it has in fact it has reinforced it in the term that the whole surplus money is going into the hands of the rich in a big way. Another example, this is leather.
Rich Qurayshi?
Sir?
Are they rich Qurayshis?
No, not rich Qurayshis. Again, Qurayshis has also become a middle level only. Rich Qurayshis are there. As I told you, these even bone industry, they used to collect, the Dalits used to collect, Muslim used to process to Madras and all other places. And the leather, the Dalits used to collect and Muslim used to process. They were in the middle level. And they used to also export. So rich Muslims were there, particularly in Madras and all, into the industry. That after liberalization has gone into the hands of the upper caste, say, rich people. And again, from there also it has moved to capitalists and all that. So again, the same, these capitalist people, they want their people in the politics. The political and capitalist class, again, that has not changed. Because that has not changed, they are reinventing new ways. Another scavenging you said, sir, in JNU, they have not allowed, they have advertised increased salary, but no other than Dalits have not come. But interestingly, now they have again now what they have done, they have completely privatized this sanitation and security, all these things. Now this is owned by rich people in Andhra Pradesh and all Reddys and all. They will be having security agencies, crores of rupees they are earning. That is surplus money. Surplus value is going into the again cronies. So as you said, there is some system which is reinforcing the the kind of hierarchy and divisions in India. That is the different from other countries. In other countries,
Always reinforcing, you're saying it is also changing.
yeah, in the different kinds, it is reinforcing using different methods. For example, in scavenging, now Muslim women also are there, Muslim men are also there. You can see in the university also. So it's not exclusive because they are creating new Dalits, we can say, neo Dalits, we can say, because they want these things to perpetuate the kind of domination lead to discrimination, and that will perpetuate. So as you said, we need, sir, you said that we need to find out. I ask you, what will be the answer to this kind of chronic capitalism, which is the main cause for this?
Any other questions?
Yeah, good morning to all of you. And today we had a very fabulous discussions on this caste and its socio-economic status and dimensions. And since beginning, and we are talking about the dimensions of caste in the very beginning. And no, it is end up with the question, and it is beginning with the question and always end up with the question. So since the panelists are so much experts in their respective areas, and when we are talking about the different dimensions of caste and what are the possible solutions that one can look into, whether it is from the policy perspective or from the no general population, I mean no, in the social perspective. So those issues also, if you no if you locate when you are talking about the issues, then it would be very helpful for the research scholars to understand the dimensions and the possible ways to come out of it. Thank you.
My question is to Professor Vinod, sir. Sir, as you reacted on this issue earlier in your talk, my question is, Muslims are backward class in India, but almost there are three categories among the Muslims, which is almost there are three categories among the Muslims in India, which is Ashraf, non-Ashraf, and Arzalas, which means higher, middle, and lower. So my question is, how can we tackle these categories differently, because they have facing problems differently?
थैंक यू सर। मेरा जो कहना ये है कि ख़ास तौर से इस पे जो कास्ट इवॉल्व हुई है या उसको इम्पोज किया गया है, तो आम तौर से अगर देखा जाए तो कास्ट के बारे में या किसी भी तरह की जो इस्तेसाल होता है या कोई भी एक दूसरे के ऊपर ज़ोर ज़बरदस्ती की जाती है, तो ये सोसाइटी जैसे जैसे ग्रो करती है उसके अंदर बड़ी पेचीदगी ह्यूमन सिविलाइजेशन जैसे जैसे डेवलप करती है, वो अपने तौर तरीके को इस तरह से बदलता है और इतनी खूबसूरती के साथ वो दूसरों तक पहुंचाता है कि दूसरा उसको एक्सेप्ट कर लेता है। और हेजमोनी, कास्ट हेजमोनी, ये सब इसी तरह की चीज़ें हैं जो इंसान कंसेंट के ज़रिए दूसरे के ऊपर थोपता है। जैसे कि गॉल्टर ने कहा, जिससे उसने कहा कि अंडरडॉग स्पीकिंग द लैंग्वेज ऑफ टॉप डॉग। अगर मैनुअल स्क्रिंजर के साथ जब सर काम किया गया तो उनसे पूछा गया बड़ी कास्ट से कि भाई इन लोगों से क्यों आप लोग काम कराते हैं, तो बड़ी कास्ट के लोग ये कहते हैं कि ये इसके अलावा करेंगे क्या, इसके अलावा तो ये कुछ कर ही नहीं सकते। अच्छा, जब उनसे पूछा गया तो वो ये कह रहे हैं कि सर ये टोकरी यही हमारी रोजी रोटी है। तो एक सर्टेन पीरियड ऑफ टाइम जब ऊंचे या बालादस्त तबकात जो मजबूत हैं वो अपनी जुबान को उनके अंदर इस तरह से पेवस कर देते हैं और उनकी जो बालादस्त ताकतवर ग्रुप है उसकी जुबान वो बोलने लगते हैं। तो इस चीज को हम कैसे टैकल करें कि वो जुबान उसी तरीके से, सर आप जेंडर में अगर देखेंगे तो हमने जब एक औरत से पूछा कि भाई घर के काम जो है और मर्द को भी करना चाहिए या नहीं करना चाहिए, या कपड़े धोना, बर्तन धोना, तो उस औरत ने कहा कि अगर कोई खानदानी औरत होगी तो वो अपने घर के मर्दों को झाड़ू बर्तन के काम नहीं करने देगी। तो क्या हुआ कि मर्द की जो पावर है या मर्द की जो जुबान है उसके एजेंडे को उस औरत ने कैप्चर कर लिया और फिर उसको एक तरीके से उसकी जुबान बन करके उसको प्रोपोगेट कर रही है। तो हम इस चीज को कैसे हम टैकल करें, इसके लिए अगर कोई सर। शुक्रिया बहुत बहुत।
Can I, sir?
Yeah, quick question. Yeah, quick question.
Yeah, sir. I will ask this question, trying to make it quick. Does this discrimination suits both the parties, the discriminators and the discriminated? Just this thing. If you can understand it, otherwise I can explain it. Does it suit both the parties, discriminated and the discriminators? Thank you, sir.
The question is understood. I'll have a quick response because it's obvious that we are running very, very late and we have to start the next session. I'm going to give very brief response. I'm again stating it. One thing is that you can we can begin to talk about solutions when we have understood the problem correctly, right? Then I think we can find appropriate solutions. So I think it's good to first concentrate on understanding the situation. This last bit, your response, I thought the speaker just before you sort of made it clear that the consent is manufactured, that women absorb, what is appropriate, and what is appropriate is what the men want, right? But at the same time, we have seen that women do resist, right? Women challenge, women question, right? And women get out of many such oppressive relationships. Many women protest. And similarly, every section, some segments of every group have been protesting. Some protests completely fail. There is violence against them, right? There are more subtle ways of killing a protest. But we can't say that protest changes nothing, right? We can't say that protest changes nothing. I think I'm just a little concerned about this idea that absolutely nothing is changing, right? That, whatever is happening, everything merely reinforces the same. I think the mechanisms change, the group distribution changes, right? New methods are employed, new kind of politics comes in, right? There are moments when we all felt that we couldn't ask any questions. Right? You people stopped watching television, right? You couldn't, I mean, the Supreme Court also said what kind of idiotic debates you are having, these what the anchors are doing, right? But so there is some resistance, some protest, something, and somehow, shall I say, with a little bit of optimism, I feel things do change. I think we must begin to study things in more detail. It is true that the very important aspects of the structure are being reproduced in new ways, and some of these oppressions are actually increased, right? But at the same time, some things are also changed, right? In a positive sense. And I think one should explore in these very differentiated, subtle ways. We should explore that. That's why what I would say. I think I should stop so that others can also respond, and we can start the next session. Thank you. Is it working?
I'll just respond to your question. Over a period of time, what we have seen is that we have to bring in to the very core of the knowledge production processes. Now, what has actually happened is that leather work was basically the domain of Muslims and Dalits, right? So there should have been the natural growth of these people. There should have been the billionaires from the segments. What has happened over a period of time is that the state has played a very, very dubious role by which it disempowered these very sections who were related with this work historically. Today, Dalits and the status of Muslims over a period, if you see from the colonial time itself, Dalits and Muslims have lost this trade, this particular. I'm not saying that they should be doing this. In fact, there should be, if they're better opportunity, they should go out. But over a period of time, it is only the Brahmins which have retained their own monopoly. At the same time, they have penetrated into the monopoly of others. Everyone has. They have not let the priest work to be taken by anybody. But at the same time, they have expanded the ventures, monopolies of everyone. And this is how this knowledge production processes have not been able to trace out this, how the privileged are keep themselves privileged, and how state has played an important role in that. And my example was because of this leather industry. If you really want to understand this process, a classical example is leather industry. Thank you.
Thanks for your questions. Even I don't even remotely interested in attributing that caste is a new phenomenon. Somebody 100 years ago deliberately, no, it is not. Caste is there for a long time. And every 100 years, caste undergoes tremendous changes. There is no doubt about it. And how caste has been the last 200 years is something that we can and we have to necessarily study. One. Second is actually this appropriation is an important category. Appropriation of history, appropriation of culture. When will people do that? When do you become extremely cautious about, or rather conscious about your history? Please remember, when you have capital in you, then you will invent your cultural capital, or rather both will have to go hand in hand. Simple two examples. I come from the southern part of India, understand, and from the very dry, rustic southern Tamil Nadu, and I have done my field work in that area, and people became Dalits in today's terminology because of British policies. In other words, they were landholding communities. One fine morning, the British taxation policy, especially in the rural areas, made them landless. Once you become a landless, then obviously it is going on for some more time, isn't it? First time it is an incident. If it goes on for a century, it becomes a tradition. 200 years, it becomes a culture. So after some time, when somebody is having a land next to you, you get a cultural shock, isn't it? So today, those who are interested in protecting the culture are actually threatened by the changes in the society. So that means today people are claiming their rights. So therefore, you get a cultural shock. So you invent something called, oh, Dalit should not get into. No, nobody will talk like that. People will say that India's culture is in trouble. So therefore, let us protect culture. Let us have cultural nationalism. This bakwas is essentially about status quoism. Understand? And therefore, The primary source of India's economy, even now, is the rural masses, or particularly the land. So those who are thrown out of the land will become landless and over a period of time become vulnerable. And after that, those who have disproportionately claimed rights over land, access to resources, will invent their own history, as simple as that. And they will claim every damn thing. One simple example. How many of you heard of M.S. Subbulakshmi? M.S. Subbulakshmi, the Carnatic music legendary? And invariably, I asked in the last 20 years of my teaching all my students which caste she is from. I said, no, sir, she's from a pious Brahmin. Actually, she's from a Devdasi community. You understand? She doesn't know her father. M stands for Madurai, that is her hometown. Those who are a little familiar with South India know that, Madurai. And S stands for her mother's name. Now, friends, the simple point is actually a community which has contributed very less to the performing arts today have monopolized everything. You understand? The Carnatic music is completely monopolized by a particular caste group. So is the case with cricket. Understand? From Madras, how many people have in fact played for Indian cricket team? If you see their names, except one or two, mostly not from one particular caste, not simply Brahmins, please. Even among Brahmins, there's one particular caste which has monopolized it. The reason is actually, this is one game where you don't have to touch anybody. You understand? Unlike soccer and football, where you end up, bumping into each other. This, unless who will have the luxury of spending 5 days standing at the corner of the ground? No, it is very expensive game. And we have subalternized it to an extent that today it has become a popular game. It is again a deliberate attempt. So from music to cricket to modern medicine, people initially, David Arnold's very forceful argument, people were unwilling to become medical college students, those who are from the upper echelon, because pata nahi ye kaun hai? How can I touch this fellow as a doctor? How can I touch these dead bodies? All the notions of purity and pollution were invoked. How over a period of time people have appropriated this modern knowledge. Once they have decided that now English medicine is here, suddenly they become English. You understand? So this appropriation, when can it happen? Once they have appropriated huge amount of resources, then it becomes possible. So today's economy has in fact again empowered the already empowered. So they become more and more aggressive. And that aggression is quite visible in all your everyday newspaper, right? But anyway, it's unnecessary to read newspaper because you know very well what the hell is happening in this country. You understand? Thank you.
So, yeah, with a small 2-3 observations about these panelists, I would like to conclude with thanks. But yes, today morning only I reached Hyderabad by doing field work for 1 week or so. So yes, but very, because those are raised very interesting questions regarding about Muslims and Dalits. What is the change and what is the continuity? Start with one book called Gilbert Slater of Madras University under the Madras presidency. Start reading that book. All of you, I suggest who have not gone through that book, please read that. What were the conditions? That study was carried out by the students of Gilbert Slater in 1916 and published in 1907. The conditions are more or less same in 2022 also. The village I visited, where Gilbert Slater student visited and prepared a report about Dalits and about OBCs and about upper caste. Conditions are more or less. The only change is rickshaw pullers' sons become owners of the auto drivers one. And tanners, Madiga community children become jobless because of stigma. Their profession was stigmatized and the Madigas were delinquent from that leather work. Now they are jobless. One important aspect is that one boy from that community told to me, my rate is fixed for month, that is 13,000 rupees. As for labor department, 18,000 rupees, but 4-5,000 middlemen, like because most of the areas are privatized and outsourced. So 5,000 will go to the middlemen and you will get 13,000. So these are the realities, sir. caste is a reality. It continues, no doubt. As Professor opined that caste will remain forever, no doubt. Don't unnecessarily think about the caste. Caste will not disappear in India. So, with this, yeah, and after Gilbert Slater, P.J. Thomas also did restudy. There were no changes. After that, Government of India also studied as a sub-study in 1971. Those changes, those conditions are even same today. So that is the change and continuity in Indian villages. Some South Indian villages by Gilbert Slater. Please read all of you if available. But those books are not available, by the way. So I called Madras University. Please find out that book. No, misplaced. No. So what I want to say that I'll stop here. So thank you so much for such a wonderful inputs and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. A. Nageshwar Rao, for moderating the session. Professor Vinod Jairat for sparing your valuable time, and it was really very important session. In fact, we were thinking to have more questions, but then the last session of the forenoon is pending. Without wasting time, I would request the chair of this next session. Next session is themed on status of religious minorities in India. Professor Danis Moin Sahab, Head Department of History at Maulana Azad National Urdu University, will be chairing the session. I invite Professor Tanveer Fazal from Department of Sociology, University of Hyderabad, to join at the dais. Professor Amirullah Khan Sahab, Adjunct Professor at MCHRD and Director of CDPP at Hyderabad, one of the economists who is known here. Professor Salah Punatil, Dr. Salah Punatil, from Center for Regional Study, University of Hyderabad. He is here. I welcome all of you for this very pertinent question and theme of discussion. I am thankful to Danish Saha for having accepted on one of the challenging area. He was saying that it is challenging area to chair because many of you who are not aware, who are not interacting, Dr. Danis Moin, Professor Danis is internationally acclaimed historian in the area of numismatic, and he represents Urdu University at the global level. We are thankful that he is intervening into the area of religious minorities and other issues. And we have seen recently in some of the discussion that his contribution and his knowledge in this area is very, very pertinent. So thank you, and I welcome you all. I'll hand over the session to Danis Moin Sahab. Before that, I'll quickly brief the present brief bios of the panelists of the session. Hopefully, we will be able to finish by 2. We are running half an hour late, and then we'll go for lunch by 2. And that will all depend upon the chair of the session. Professor Tanveer Fazal is specializing in the area of nationalism, community formation, and identifications, with a specific focus on their implications on discourse of rights and entitlements. Additionally, his research has a strong element of public policy orientations and involves a rigorous analysis of existing policy instruments while suggesting new modes of intervention. Prior joining to this before that, JNU, he was teaching at Nelson Mandela Center for Peace and Conflict Resolutions at Jamia Millia Islamia. And he was also teaching at Government Degree College in one of the college at Bagbat in Western Uttar Pradesh. Many of you young students would know that he was a research consultant with Prime Minister's high-level committee that we know as Sachar Committee, where he was a consultant. He wrote very wonderful pieces out of the research, and we could see in the Times of India editorials. Fazal has been Associate Fellow Honorary at Delhi Policy Group, member of International Editorial Advisory Board of Journal South Asian History and Culture, and ex-officio member of Planning Commission's Working Group on Empowerment of Minorities for 11 5-year plan. Now we do not have 5-year plan. His publications, I would mention 2-3 at least: The Nation and the Minority Rights, Comparative Perspective on Muslim and Sikh Identities by Routledge, Minority Nationalism in South Asia by Routledge again, and Minority Conundrum, Living in Mediterranean Times by Penguin. And you could see his publications in the area of nationalism, state, and minorities in dozens of peer-reviewed, internationally acclaimed journals and books. His work in this area makes him very special in social sciences, who talks on and writes on minority issues. We have other panelists, Professor Amirullah Khan. Many of you are familiar with his face and his work. He is a professional economist and professor who has worked in the area of, primarily in the area of health, education, and agriculture sectors. Dr. Khan has worked for the Ministry of Finance, Government of India, and UNDP at Project Large. He is also known as development economist. Presently, he is adjunct professor at MCHRDI, Government of Telangana. He is also research director at Center for the Policy Development and Policy Practice, one of the think tank emerging in Hyderabad. He is associated with various institutions, NALSA. I mean, association in terms of he goes as a visiting professor in these institutions at NALSA, Indian School of Business, IFT, and others. Some of his research projects were sponsored by European Commission, NCAR, Planning Commission, CII, World Bank, and so on and so forth. Amir Khan was also associated with Maulana Azad National Urdu University few years back as Director of Civil Services Coaching Academy. We are fortunate to have you here in this panel discussions. And anytime we request you, you are there for students and teachers in terms of academic deliberations. I thank you so much for accepting our invitations. The third and very young social scientist, Dr. Salah Punatil, is a sociologist and a faculty at Center for Regional Studies, University of Hyderabad. Salah completed his postdoctoral fellowship at Max Planck Institute for the study of religious and ethnic diversity, Göttingen, Germany. He also taught at Tezpur University, that is in Assam, Delhi School of Economics, and University of Delhi before joining Hyderabad University. His major area of research includes ethnic violence, migration in borderlands, citizenship, Muslims in South Asia, and intersection of archives and ethnography. His recent publications, Interrogating Communalism, Violent Citizenship Minorities in South India, is one of the very well-read book by Routledge. And then this book examines area of conflict and violence among religious minorities by religious minorities. Salah has published in various journals in the area of citizenship studies, history and anthropology, South Asian research, and also in contributions to Indian sociology. Currently, and many of the sociology students would aware that he was a young recipient of M.N. Srinivas Award for a Young Indian Sociologist in 2015. That made him nationally visible. Salah's current research involves on the migration from the present-day Bangladesh region to Northeast India and the crisis of citizenship and ethnic violence in the contemporary times. I think this is the area he was interested to talk on. So we have diversity of speaker and panelists. With an apology that we have taken your time in the previous session, but then I hope that you all will give a wonderful presentation and we'll enjoy your listening. Over to Professor Danis Moin.
Thank you, Zaya. I mean, I don't know how much justice I'm going to do with this, the topic and the things. You know, he has asked me to preside the session, which is being spoken by the expert of the subject. Of course, Tanvir Fazal, I have not met him, but I have heard him about from my friends Zaya, Saeed and Shazia. They have been regularly discussing, in informal discussion. We had discussion about his work and all that. So meeting for the first time and welcoming you, Mr. Tanvir Fazal Sahab. And of course, Amirullah Khan is well known to us and he has been to here for many time and is a former colleague to me, and we have been coming to listen him whenever he's speaking on any topic. So I'm also one of the benefactors from his speeches and his talk. Mr. Professor Dr. Saleh and his Salah Punatil. I welcome you, but I have heard your CV from Zaya's, but a top level CV you people have. So, I mean, the topic which he has assigned me to preside, it was very slightly because I belong to minority committee. I have been reading minorities things quite often. Well, I take minority in a different angle. I take from the history point of view. But of course, this session is not with the historical context and all that. But what I am trying to understand, or trying to listen from you people, or you trying to give some relevant information, because the topic is a status of religious minorities. So I don't know whether religious minority is only being covered here for Muslim or other communities also being covered. By the way, even the topic has not been given to me, so this is my indicative. So I'll not take much of your time here just now, because I just want to start the session with Professor Tanveer Fazal, because I think Tanveer Fazal is the first name. So I request you to come and you deliver, and then we can have a discussion a little later. Thank you very much. Please.
Thank you, the chair and the organizers. I hope I'm audible to everyone. And well, I was here in the previous session as well. And the questions which have emerged from the floor, very experiential, as well as the way in which we understand the today's problems, particularly those which are associated with the historically marginal groups in India. This session is about the status of minorities, and other places, or even talks in some of the talks in MANUU, though they were largely the online discussions, where I have argued around the question of conceptualizing the minority in India and the complexities associated with that. I will not go deeper into that question, because it has been dealt with in any ways. And today in particular, I'm interested in understanding the Muslim question today. The Muslims amongst the minorities make a very specific case. In my understanding, it is because, particularly amongst the religious minorities, it is so because of the very complex relationship with the question of nationalism itself, the nationhood idea, which probably is not so with other minorities. And that makes the project denationalization by certain, majoritarian political formations far more easier. And that is what the specificity of the Muslim case could be. The specificity of the Muslim case is also amongst the religious minorities, if you look at Muslims as a category, which of course is not a monolithic category, which I'll refer to a bit later. But at the same time, Muslims as a category, if you see across socio-economic indicators, amongst the religious minorities, probably they are the worst sufferers, and which was also indicated by such a committee and other committee reports, many of which with which Professor Amirullah Khan has been associated with. So, so that is where my argument rests, and therefore, I wish to little bit look into the past and see how this Muslim question emerged, and how in different phases of history has revolved in a different way altogether. The case of Indian Muslims is, of course, riddled with complexity. They are not a community in classical sociological sense of the term. They are, one may call, their community of communities in a certain sense. They are also not a status or class category, or even, you can say they have their own regional variations as well, both in terms of culture as well as their definite economic, even in economic terms, developmental indicators, their regional pattern which has emerged. In certain parts of India, Muslims lag far behind others, whereas in other parts of India, they may not necessarily be lagging as far behind as in other parts. So, so in that sense, again, we may not see Muslims necessarily as a monolithic entity. They're segmented into internal divisions, Shia Sunni sects, upper, middle, and lower caste, which has found reference here as well, and also distributed into affluent and impoverished classes. So there is a definite class formation also amongst Muslims, although the Muslim upper layer might be very small, but is still significantly present. To expect a unity of thought
action and behavioral pattern is far-fetched. Leave aside, unity of cultural makeup. Nevertheless, the classification strategy, which Indian state generally has adopted, it cares little for these nuances, and it seeks to simplify the narrative into a singular conceptual mold. Muslimness is produced, I argue, not much through inner system of beliefs or through commonality of cultural and symbolic practices, because they vary immensely. It is discursively produced at the cross-section of interactions between state, community, and nation. The idea of nation itself. For instance, the colonial practices of enumeration and classification of populations around religious beliefs paved the way for the construction of clearly marked boundaries of distinction, and which probably might have been fuzzy identity, but they were reinforced as very important political categories. The partition and the subsequent politics of identities in South Asia have only sharpened religion-based divides into substantive collectives, marked by hierarchies of power and position, producing a new narrative of majority and minorities. Now, how do we approach the Muslim question in India today? In the face of spiraling rise of majoritarian nationalism, the subject appears far more pertinent today than ever in the past. Yet every epoch in India's political history is confronted with this question. This question, if you go into the past, again, was constantly being raised, the Muslim question in India. And we have had various multiple responses, as well as immense contestation on this singular question. And yet, there's hardly ever been any resolution. If in broad historical sweeps, if we can look at it, prior to the partition, the Muslim question was largely a contestation between the emerging modernizing elite, composed of professional classes, many of them urbanized from a generation or two earlier, and the traditional religious orthodoxy, which saw the Muslim question, saw the Muslim question completely differently. For the modernizing middle class elite, the Muslim question was largely political. In terms of representation, the similar delegation and other things which you remember, the 1906 and the 1909 Government of India Act, and subsequently you have the separate representation, etc. And eventually it led to the idea of the nation being defined on the basis of religious identity, which led to partition. The traditional elite, on the other, those represented by the orthodoxy, framed the question differently altogether. It rested its case on the idea of identity, cultural purity, and certain kind of religious autonomy. The political question was not so significant for this category, for this section of the elite. Now, post-independence, a much smaller middle class amongst Muslims, burdened by the weight of partition, shunned political stewardship, and any kind of public engagement on the question of Muslims and their empowerment. The traditionalists, on the other hand, having distanced themselves from the politics and the temporal questions of empowerment, equity, justice, etc., we're far more happy, confined to the cultural and the domain of the spiritual. In this kind of the period just immediately after partition, if you see, this was a period also in the public discourse. The weight of partition itself was very much felt by the intellectuals of who were dealing with the Muslim question as such. And as a result, various kinds of affirmations of loyalty, ideas of Indianization emerged. The idea of Indianization was one such variant of Indian nationalism, which though projected itself in terms of very secular language, of Indianization as, and sometimes in the films, etc., it would reflect itself in terms of prioritizing the Indian identity over all other kinds of identities. One of the famous sociologists who studied nationalism would argue that what is nation? It is something which demands terminal loyalty, that your final loyalty has to be towards the nation. Now, this is the kind of an idea which Indianization was producing. But this Indianization also had its own, sort of a cultural leaning, cultural inclination. One of the master theorists of the project Indianization was Balraj Madhok, one who came from the Jansang. And for some reason, because of his far more radical views, even differed from the mainstream Hindu right. Balraj Madhok produced this idea about Indianization in terms of how the Muslims needed to completely assimilate into what he could see as Indian culture, which you can, you refer to as largely the Brahminical or Sanskritic culture. This would mean, of course, that all cultural associations of Muslims, all kinds of cultural practices which were distinctively Muslim, which may, as I say, vary from place to place, would have to be shunned. And whatever could be referred to as Indian, or, which, as I said, was drawn from largely the cultural mainstream, the majoritarian mainstream, had to be adopted. This ultimately would prove the final loyalty of the Muslims as a community. A fundamental problem with this question about loyalty, of course, was associated with the idea of extraterritorial loyalty, etc. The 1950s and 60s, in the Constitutional Assembly debates or in various kinds of other public fora, these questions actually were thoroughly being debated, and proofs of loyalty were being asked from Muslims. During the wars between India and Pakistan, for instance, every time, even in the secular, references, it was frequently demanded that Muslims should prove their loyalty by taking up arms against the enemy nation. They had to relinquish property, which was referred to as enemy property, if anyone from their own family had visited Pakistan or had moved to Pakistan. The Muslim question in this period, as I was saying, was struggling to to deal with the burden of partition. But post this phase, in the earlier session, Professor Jairat was referring to how the constructions of a certain nature may not necessarily remain static. They change over a period of time. And definitely in terms of Muslims too, the context did change over a period of time. That the 70s and the 80s was a different phase altogether. This was a phase, of course, they were faced with violence. There were episodic emergence of violence in various parts of the country, most of them confined to the eastern and the much of broadly what North India is referred to. However, this was also the period in which you see that gradually the question about Indianization receded. Somehow or the other, the secular narrative, now built around this idea of secular nationalism, now built around the question of pluralism, was ready to accept competing or different identities as well. We are now more comfortable with the identities which may not necessarily be thoroughly different, and hence the whole idea of composite nationalism found a new kind of a manifestation. The new kind of manifestation in which, while composite nationalism also had within itself some idea of fusion, that it's argued around what was commonly referred to as Ganga Jamni Tehzeeb, but it reflected itself or manifested itself in, say, producing language such as Hindustani, which would borrow from all Indian languages, etc. Nevertheless, it demanded a certain kind of a fusion of identities. This new kind of a pluralist kind of an idea increasingly now found more acceptance in the official domain too. And hence you see that the whole idea of Hindi imposition was gradually, left aside. Also because of the resistance from various different quarters, not simply by the Muslim elite. And this is the period in which the Article 29 and 30 of the Indian Constitution, which assured the minorities as to be able to have their own kinds of cultural practices, to establish their own educational institutions, etc. This Article 29 and 30 had a certain kind of a execution as well. This, while earlier it had remained just an idea packed into the constitution, but now there are a lot of new kinds of, and this was a period in which you have the Gopal Singh Committee report prior to the Sachar Committee report, and later in the early 2000s, you had the Sachar Committee report, Sachar Committee instituted to study the specific case of Muslims in terms of their status deprivation. This was a long way. If you see from the period earlier when the Muslim question was being, raised, and at one point of time when it was, troubled with whole idea of loyalty, identity, etc. And now, with the institution of the Sachar Committee and the Sachar Committee report, prior to that, you had the Gopal Singh Committee report, and then also, along with Sachar Committee, you had the Ranganath Misra Commission report, post-Sachar Committee report, etc. All of this pointed towards the developmental question. The Muslim question now was no longer just an identity question. It reframed this question was now reframed into a developmental kind of an idea. Muslims now emerge as a developmental category. Many of the economists who were earlier not necessarily using Muslims as a category in terms of indicators, etc., were not now readily accepting it. And you will see many of the, articles or papers published in EPW, for example, post-Sachar, accepting Muslims as a socio-religious category and trying to judge their developmental, profile along with other marginal communities of India. This had its own problems as well. One fundamental problem, which was that we, as I referred to, that this whole idea that Muslims are a monolithic category. In terms of developmental frames too, Muslims may not necessarily be a, singular kind of an identity, singular kind of an entity. There are different communities among Muslims who have developed differently over a period of time. Some have suffered cumulative discrimination. That cumulative discrimination would mean that you have discrimination not only on account of being a religious minority, but also probably on account of you being associated with those kind of professions or occupations which are considered to be polluting in India. Say, for example, a Muslim Bangi in Uttar Pradesh would have multiple, indices of discrimination. So this, although Muslims emerge now as a development category, But of course, their internal, segmentation, the internal differences, the question about social hierarchy within, was yet to be addressed. It was addressed in a different way earlier itself. It was addressed when the social justice, politics emerged in India, and which produced two different reports on backward classes commission. One was the Kaga-Kalelkar Commission report, and the second was the Mandal Commission report at the national level. The state governments also instituted their own backward classes commission reports, and all of them almost. Okay, 2 minutes. Okay. And in all of them almost, you would see that Muslim caste groups have been, recognized. Their developmental kind of march or growth has been accounted, and also certain kinds of amelioration suggested. This began with Kaga-Kalelkar, although it was rejected by the Nehru cabinet, but of course the Mandal Commission report accepted it, and therefore we have OBC amongst Muslims as a recognized category, and a large number of groups today, although many have been denied and they need to fight for their recognition, but a large number of them came to be accepted. This needs further, elaboration as well, and in certain states which have been done, and say, for example, in Tamil Nadu, also in, I believe, in Andhra Pradesh as well as in Bihar, where the OBC as a category has been split, and as a result of which, Muslim OBCs, who suffer the most in terms of cumulative discrimination, have come to be, recognized separately from the advanced OBCs. That is one idea which we could see as being recognized over a period of time. But at the same time, and where I would like to, which was actually the focus of this paper, but anyways, because of shortage of time, I'll just focus on it for 2 minutes. The notion which I want to, the concept which I want to, deal with or engage with is the idea of constricted citizenship. The constricted citizenship has a association. Every idea of citizenship has its association with the idea of nationalism as well. The nature of nationalism which has emerged also produces the kind of citizenship which it offers to its citizens. So you will have majoritarian nationalist frameworks would always have certain idea of different classes of citizens. Secular modernist framework would emphasize on universal citizenship. Pluralist nationalisms, wherever they prevail, would recognize probably the differential growth of different category of citizens and suggest ameliorative measures. The constricted citizenship is also the product of otherization. When I say that there is a constricted citizenship in India, the promise is, of course, of universal citizenship. If you go to the preamble, if you go further into the constitution, there is an idea about also targeted development, which means it goes beyond the universal citizenship and accepts this notion of differential citizenship, differential in the sense that those who have been left behind may need additional help. But at the same time, you see, particularly in the current phase, when we have the aggressive majoritarian nationalism emerging, the Hindutva right wing occupying state power, and thus with a series of beginning from whether you say 370 with triple talaq, the criminalization bit, the series of other measures, etc. Also, various state governments coming with all kinds of laws against interfaith marriage, anti-conversion, anti-slaughter bills, etc. You see that there is a definite growth of this notion of constricted citizenship even further, which would mean, therefore, that the new kind of a nationalism now rests largely on the process of otherization. It produces and promotes this idea as a certain kind of central to its ideological makeup, without which this new nationalism cannot actually be assessed. If we assess it without this idea of otherization which it entails, it would be, I would say, in a half an effort. So it is here where we see that the Muslim question has now emerged as largely not simply as an identity or an equity question, but what such a committee had left aside was the question of security. So today, the Muslim question is centrally the paramount one is the idea of security. It is here that when I say that the Muslim is externally produced, while internally it may be hugely differentiated, all in terms of hierarchy, in terms of development, in terms of regional variation, in terms of multiplicity of cultural practices, in terms of sects, etc. But at the same time, when it is produced externally, at the cross-section of this idea of state, nation, and community, what we see is the emergence of this, or the promotion of, or the construction of a sort of a Muslim as a monolith, as a security dilemma, as, you know, constant weaponization of this kind of a dialogue and these kinds of constructions. And if you see in the past few 2 or 3 days, the series of events which have taken place, newspapers should be read, also to understand that how majoritarian frameworks work, and to understand the discourses and particularly hegemonic discourses, etc., where you will see that how this kind of a security idea has been further advanced, and as a result, Muslims are faced with this recurring, problem of prioritizing their security over all matters, all other. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Fazal. Now I request Aminullah, please come. We'll take the question last.
Thank you so much, Danish bhai. Zia, Nageshwar, where is Nageshwar gone? There you are. Thank you so much for inviting me here. All of you. आप में से कई लोगों को जिनको मैं बहुत अच्छी तरह जानता हूँ. Tanveer, thanks for saying everything that had to be said in the maximum time that you could take. So after I gave up some of my time to Tanveer, and Salah, वो जो 2 minute बचेंगे मेरे बाद, that is yours. See, the first point that I want to make is the point about minorities. और मैं आप सब लोगों से ये गुजारिश करूंगा कि ये जो नई किताब छपी है, इसका एक चैप्टर है जो इम्तियाज साहब ने लिखा है, वो आप जरूर पढ़ें. और इम्तियाज ने ये सवाल पूछा है कि आखिर माइनॉरिटी होती क्या है, और वो सवाल जिसका थोड़ा सा जवाब तनवीर ने भी दिया कि आखिर हम कब से मुसलमानों को पढ़ने लगे हैं एज अ स्पेशल कैटेगरी, एंड क्यों. ये बुनियादी सवाल है कि आखिर माइनॉरिटी होता कौन है और माइनॉरिटी का स्टेटस कैसे डिफाइन होता, कहाँ से आया ये टर्म माइनॉरिटी. इम्तियाज साहब बता रहे हैं कि वो यूरोपियन कॉन्सेप्ट है, वो माइनॉरिटी बड़ी एक मुस्तकिल, बड़ी मुनज़्ज़म एक ग्रुप होता है, हमारी तरह नहीं कि वेयर द लाइन्स आर वेरी ब्लर्ड कि मैं कौन हूँ. Am I a minority? I am a male Indian 56-year-old. The male Indian makes me a majority. The 56-year-old makes me a minority. I am an economist, it makes me a very small minority. And also very powerful, also very, at one time at least, if not now. तो हम कौन हैं और हम कौन सी आइडेंटिटी को प्रोफेस करते हैं, किस आइडेंटिटी को बिलोंग करते हैं, तो हम में से कौन से ऐसे हैं जो वाकई ऑप्रेस्ड हैं और कौन से ऐसे हैं जिनको बड़ा फायदा हुआ है. अगर हमसे अक्सर ये सवाल पूछा जाता है बाहर कि भाई आप हिंदुस्तानी मुसलमान हैं, आप तो ऑप्रेस्ड होंगे, तो उसका ऑनेस्ट जवाब तो ये है कि भाई मैं तो ऑपरेज नहीं हूं. इफ यू आर आस्किंग मी, आई हैव डन वेल. बट इफ यू आर आस्किंग मी वेदर द मुस्लिम इंडियन इज ऑपरेज, आंसर इज यस. But the sample you are looking at is the wrong sample. So therefore, it is very important for us to understand this whole minority issue. And the use of the word minority is very problematic in any such discussion, because as Danish bhai ne shuru mein hi keh diya ki masla hamara is not religious minorities in India. Masla hamara is Muslims in India. And that is what we are looking at today. And this problem starts soon after independence, and Tanveer, spoke on it very well on how that identity is produced from the outside. तो आप देखिए हिस्टोरिकल पस मंजर कि जब 1947 होता है तो मुसलमान सबसे बड़ा मसला इज इन फ्रंट ऑफ द मुस्लिम कि वो कहाँ है, कहाँ जाए, कौन सा मुल्क उसका है. And is the Muslim celebrating 1947? It must have been a very difficult time कि हम क्या सेलिब्रेट कर रहे हैं और हम कौन से चैलेंजेस अब फेस करेंगे. एक तरह के चैलेंजेस खत्म हुए, अगले ही दिन से नए चैलेंजेस शुरू. अब हमारे चैलेंजेस शुरू होते हैं उर्दू, यूनिफॉर्म सिविल कोड, यूनिवर्सिटी. यानी यही 3 मसले हम 50-60 साल तक खुसूसन यूपी बिहार में लड़ते रहे. उसके बाद फिर ये मसले आए जो तनवीर ने बताया, सिक्योरिटी वाला मसला, बल्कि अब तनवीर नाउ इट इज अपग्रेडेड, अब तो सर्वाइवल का मसला. सो देयरफॉर दैट if you see the 75 years of India's independence, which is really what this is about, it is a journey from confusion about where one is, where one ought to be, what is going to happen to the Muslim in a new setup, in a new constitution where the rights are really very vague, to a situation in the 75th year where the question is really that of survival. So it is a difficult journey. और चूंकि आप लोग सब यहाँ पे हैं, most of you are students, what I want to talk about are the questions that remain unanswered. पहला सवाल तो unanswered यही है कि minority कौन है और क्या is every Muslim a minority. In that you can situate this whole new debate that has started कि मुसलमानों में पसमानदा कौन है और कौन नहीं है. दूसरा सवाल ये है कि अगर इलेक्टेड डेमोक्रेसी शुरू हुई इंडिया में तो इसमें मुसलमान का रोल क्या रहा. क्या मुसलमानों का रोल एज द फार राइट वुड इमेजिन, वाज इट अ वोट बैंक रोल, या वाज इट अ रोल दैट denied, and this is a very important question, why don't we have a single example of Muslim leadership post independence India? Can you name a Muslim leader? And you are not allowed to say मौलाना आजाद क्योंकि वो इंडिपेंडेंस के पहले गए. उसके बाद आप बताएं कि मुस्लिम लीडर कौन था और क्यों नहीं आया कोई मुस्लिम लीडर, और आज तक भी क्यों नहीं है. हर बार जब ये सवाल उठता है मुसलमानों की तहफ्फुज का एंड व्हाटएवर, एवरीबडी ब्लेम्स सम मुस्लिम लीडरशिप, और हम देखते रहते हैं आसपास कि है कौन ये मुस्लिम लीडरशिप, कहाँ गई और क्यों नहीं पैदा हुई. इलेक्टेड डेमोक्रेसीज में जहां इतनी बड़ी कॉन्स्टिट्यूएंसी है वहां one assumes the whole premise of democracy is that there will be a solid leadership that presents a view, that presents a vision, and that protects. तो ये क्यों हुआ कि मुसलमान वोटर का लीडर हमेशा या तो मुलायम सिंह रहे या लालू प्रसाद रहे या अर्जुन सिंह रहे. You will never find a Muslim leader. And is that a natural outcome of a universal adult franchise which doesn't differentiate on proportional representation, or was there something curious about India that it never happened? America maybe you will find now Muslim leadership emerging, but you don't find that emerging in India, and that's one question that I would like to leave with the student कि ये क्यों हुआ. दूसरा सवाल ये कि क्या वाकई इंडियन मुस्लिम ने डिस्क्रिमिनेशन फेस किया या मुसलमानों ने डेप्रीवेशन फेस किया, या दोनों फेस किए, या ये कि पहले डेप्रीवेशन था, उसके बाद डिस्क्रिमिनेशन शुरू हुआ, कहाँ पे खत्म होता है और कहाँ से दूसरा शुरू होता है? डिस्क्रिमिनेशन इज ए स्टेटेड ऑब्जेक्टिव, जो फिर तनवीर की एक बात मैं आपको दोहरा दूं जो बहुत अहम बात थी, वो ये कि जब आप नेशनलिज्म को देखते हो, नेशन स्टेट का डेफिनेशन देखते हैं, वो जो 19वीं सदी में नेशन स्टेट शुरू होता है, दैट इज एन इकोनॉमिक कॉन्सेप्ट दैट लुक्स इनवर्ड्स, that is protectionist, and that necessarily is based on a discouragement to movement and migration. और जहां से हिंदुस्तान from being a country starts becoming a nation, जहां से nationalist एजेंडा शुरू होता है, वहां से फिर discrimination, deprivation starts to become discrimination against this other. Is that so? Is that where you can draw a line? That is again up to you. बहुत सारा डेटा अवेलेबल है, तो वो आप जरूर देखें. अगेन गोइंग बैक टू इम्तियाज़ पेपर इन दैट बुक, जहां पे वो कहते हैं कि भाई ये मुसलमानों की स्टडी क्यों नहीं होती इंडिया में, और अगर मुसलमानों के ऊपर कुछ रिसर्च होता है तो वो मुसलमान ही क्यों करते हैं. देयर हैज टू बी एन आउटसाइडर पर्सपेक्टिव दैट लुक्स एट द डेटा एंड टेल्स अस कि कहां पे कब शुरू होता है. जो आखिरी बात मैं बताना चाह रहा हूं आपको वो ये कि अगर आप इस डेटा को गौर से देखें तो मुसलमानों के दो पीरियड्स निकल के आते हैं, एक बिफोर मंडल और एक आफ्टर मंडल. मंडल में सिर्फ आई एम सिचुएटिंग इट इन अ टाइम कॉन्टेक्स्ट, इट्स नॉट बिकॉज ऑफ मंडल. मंडल के आसपास अगर आप 1940 से 1980 तक देखें मुसलमानों का सिचुएशन, so in economic categorization you will find कि हिंदुस्तानी मुसलमान जो है वो हिंदू अपर कास्ट के नीचे और हिंदू बैकवर्ड क्लास के थोड़ा सा ऊपर सिचुएटेड है इन ऑल इकोनॉमिक पर कैपिटा इनकम्स, लाइफ एक्सपेक्टेंसी, एजुकेशन, ऑल ऑफ दैट. और फिर उसके नीचे एससी एंड एसटी बीइंग द वर्स्ट. 40 years later 2006-2016 में जब हम फिर देखते हैं डेटा, तो the Muslim situation is now going below the backward caste, below the scheduled caste, and somewhere a little above the scheduled tribe. ये क्यों हुआ? ये ऐसे क्यों होता है कि 40 साल वहां और फिर 40 साल लगते हैं उसको नीचे आने में? ये क्यों होता है? ये क्यों हुआ? ये डेटा कहता है. क्यों हुआ इस पे हमने किसी ने कोई तहकीक नहीं की, कुछ नहीं लिखा. इज इट बिकॉज ऑफ रिजर्वेशन टू बैकवर्ड क्लास? इज इट बिकॉज ऑफ लैक ऑफ रिजर्वेशन टू मुस्लिम्स? इज इट बिकॉज ऑफ इकोनॉमिक रिफॉर्म? इज इट बिकॉज ऑफ अर्बन इंडिया? इज इट बिकॉज ऑफ स्किल्स? वी डोंट नो. वी शुड लुक एट दैट क्वेश्चन. ये आप लोगों की एक और जिम्मेदारी है. और आखिरी बात ये कि अगर आप दो चीजें देखें, दो जो हॉलमार्क होती हैं एक डेवलप्ड सोसाइटी, यानी इकोनॉमिकली जैसे डेवलप होती सोसाइटी फ्रॉम लो इनकम टू मिडिल इनकम टू हाई इनकम, तो होता यह है कि जब मुल्क ग्रो होने लगता है तो हर खानदान में on an average what happens in communities is that the second generation is better than the previous one. That is what should happen. अब जब सब गरीब है और थोड़ी जब पूरा मुल्क इंप्रूव हो रहा है तो every family should become better off compared to the previous generation. This is known as intergenerational mobility. Intergenerational mobility को अगर आप फिर communities में divide करें तो ये क्यों होता है कि intergenerational mobility among the SC and ST, among the ST particularly, is pretty high. Among the BC is high, but only among the Muslims it goes negative. And Musalman abadi mein, India mein, the new generation is worse off than the previous generation. आपका कलीग ये कहता है कि मेरे बाप के पास छोटा सा घर था, मेरे पास बड़ा घर है. मेरे बाप के पास साइकिल थी, मेरे पास कार है. You will say कि मेरे बाप के पास कार थी, मैं साइकिल चला रहा हूँ. So why is it that intergenerational mobility in India among Muslims on an aggregate has come down? And the biggest issue is that the Muslim is predominantly an urban phenomenon. 40% मुसलमान शहर में रहता है, 30% नॉन मुसलमान शहर में रहता है। ये क्यों होने लगा है पिछले 2 सेंसस से कि मुसलमानों की अर्बन आबादी और अर्बन माइग्रेशन कम होने लगा है, बाकी सबका अर्बन माइग्रेशन बढ़ने लगा है, खुसूसन STAC, और मुसलमान अर्बन माइग्रेशन हैज एक्चुअली कम डाउन. And the final question that Amitabh Kundu answered in some sense पिछले महीने कि कोविड के बाद क्या हुआ, कोविड में क्या डिस्क्रिमिनेशन मुसलमानों के साथ ज्यादा हुआ. इनिशियल डेटा तो ये बता रहा है कि 2 कम्युनिटीज के साथ कोविड के बाद बहुत ज्यादा डिस्क्रिमिनेशन हुआ. 100% डिस्क्रिमिनेशन इज अगेंस्ट द विमेन. विमेन लूज आउट. Women की labor force participation rate before COVID is something like 27%. After COVID is 9%. In Muslims, there is no discrimination. It's a very interesting finding that he has done. अगर आप गांव में देखें तो you don't find discrimination against Muslims in the workforce. But जब आप शहर में देखें तो you see 100% discrimination. Thank you.
Thank you. Many questions have been given to you to answer, and of course, he has also given some answer. I'll request Dr. Saleh, please come.
Thank you, Chair. Also thank Dr. Zia for giving me this opportunity to speak here. I will not take much time since we are already running out of time, and like we had very interesting two speakers, and a lot of information is already covered. And I'm not sure if what I'm going to speak completely fit into the broad idea of status of minorities in India. Perhaps I'm raising a rather more fundamental question of, if you have to discuss the question of status of minorities or certain sections of population in India, first they need to be recognized as citizens of the nation, right? And I'm talking about that crisis in one particular region and about a particular Muslim community. So it's more of a micro story than a micro level understanding of the question of minority in India. So this is largely from the field work and the study that I'm carrying out in Assam, and perhaps I hope this will add to the kind of issues that we are discussing today. So I'm talking about the very, we are all familiar with the issue of NRC and CAA and the kind of crisis that has emerged since then, and the kind of issues that are there in the public debate. So I think we need to talk about the question of migration and citizenship much more seriously than ever to understand the question of the plights of minorities in India, and especially about certain communities who are historically been moving across borders but then seen as increasingly as illegal migrants. So there are three things that I would like to briefly flag here about the situation in Assam, and especially about the Bengali-speaking Muslims who are who has some kind of origin from present-day Bangladesh region. So the issues, like if you look at the crisis, I mean, we can see, I think there are three things that we need to understand. One is about the process of 3 Ds, actually, process of detection, detention, and deportability in India. So to talk about the context a bit, there has been a very longer history of migration from present-day Bangladesh region to Assam, and there has been constant flux of population because of economic and political reasons. But then, there was also a kind of political discourse in the region that people who speak Bengali, like the Muslims especially, who speak Bengali language, are as increasingly seen as illegal migrants. So there is a particular kind of dominant argument which we can see in the political discourse and also largely in the academic discourse, which essentially see this particular population, Bengali-speaking Muslims, as essentially illegal migrants who comes to the region and take away the land of the people take their economic resources, take the political opportunities, and so on. So, and in a sense, the political process is largely legitimizes this, and there is a consensus between the academics and the political discourse on this matter. And what we have seen in the form of NRC is eventually a culmination of much more severe kind of, or more of a operationalizing it in the form of administrative and at the level of administration and policy. But what we need to give attention in this context is not so much about the question of illegal migration, but the idea called migrant illegality, like how and why certain population in the nation is identified as necessarily illegal migrants, not because of the fact that they are illegal migrants, but they are constructed as such in the political discourse. So, which we can better capture in terms of the idea of migrant illegality. And also, I think we need to talk about the crisis of citizenship today in terms of the precarity, like the idea of precarious citizenship, because instead of using categories like undocumented, stateless, illegal, etc., I think precarious citizenship gives interesting clues about how certain sections in the nation are having a particular kind of status which is neither of citizenship nor of illegal in that sense, because it gives us a sense of the idea of ambiguities around their status, and also about their vulnerability and exposure to violence and marginalization in such political circumstances. So, what I hint here is that precarious citizenship. I mean, there are sections of population in the nation who now experience this precarious citizenship because, on the one hand, they have been living here for a very long time. At the same time, they do not enjoy the fuller status as citizens, or sometimes or they lose their citizenship status over a period of time. I think a related idea is also about irregular citizenship. Irregular citizenship is about it's not possible for certain sections of population in the country to be clearly identified as, again, citizens and non-citizens, because their status varies. So my cases from Assam, in fact, shows that there were people who lived as citizens for a long time, then identified as doubtful voters, or not fully losing their citizenship status, but doubtful voters or referred cases. I'll explain these points soon. For a very long time. So they were kept in a limbo phase for quite some time. Like, for example, doubtful voters is about suspending their right to vote. Still, they can avail certain kind of facilities of the government and live with that kind of, ambiguous space. But then what we see over a period of time, and increasingly in the context of NRC, is that they are losing the status as citizen itself completely. So, there is this process of moving from the status of citizens to a doubtful or ambiguous position to then a completely stripping their right as citizens, and then possibly ending up in detention center, or the condition of deportability is something that that people face there. But my point here is that it's not the NRC and CA that actually, I mean, it brought the larger issue, and it's also a kind of massive kind of state intervention to take away the rights of the people. But there has been a longer history to it, because my fieldwork actually shows that there has been people who are detained in detention centers for several years, since 2010 or so. And I have interviewed people who lived in detention centers. There are actually 6 detention centers already there in Assam, although there is one big detention center is coming up in Golpara, which is which came in the limelight in the context of NRC and CA. But there has been, and these are all located in the jails. And I have interviewed people who lived in those detention centers and then came out after fighting the case. So what I have understood is, by looking at the history of the situation in Assam, is that since 1980s there has been this process of detection in different mode, like first in the form of IMDT Act, which was part of the Assam Accord, where state wanted to detect people, and the procedure was like the one who accuses will have to prove that the accused is actually illegal migrant, which was seen as ineffective for a longer time. And then the issue of de-voter and referred cases, which means the police would identify people who are illegal, and then it is the responsibility of police to prove that. So there, what I'm not going to the detail of it. What I'm indicating is that there has been this longer history of detection process in different ways, which were always kind of a double-edged tactic of the state. Like on the one hand, assert about the legality, which is part of the the electoral politics. At the same time, not having concrete solutions to it, or proper way of identifying and so on. But things have changed largely after 2005, when the Supreme Court struck this IMDT and came up with this point that it is the one who is accused will have to prove their citizenship. I mean, it's not on the one who accuses. Since then, there has been several cases where people were actually brought into detention centers, and the cases I have studied, like people who have lived in detention centers, actually proves that in many of those cases, it is the there were a lot of like the bureaucratic errors, largely many cases. Like, say, if I give an example, like how, for example, incongruencies between the names given in different records, or in terms of age, or in terms of relation with the parents and children, or other kinds of errors in the paper record itself, is taken as a case to say that one is a Bangladeshi. Or there are instances where familial relationships are not properly recorded, and which is quite understandable, especially when we talk about communities which are not educated, do not have proper kinds of documents in hand. And there are instances where people have then proven their citizenship after staying in the detention center, fighting it with the help of lawyer, and then proving that they're citizens and coming back from the detention center, which actually proves the fact that the arbitrariness of bureaucracy and prejudice, and also errors in the way in which people are being identified as illegal, is actually taking away the rights of the people completely. And it also talks about the kinds of suffering that they have in the detention center, because they don't have even the rights of criminals, in the sense that criminals have the right to have at least go on bail. But if you are not seen as a citizen, then all your rights are taken away. And there are several stories of people, like how they have suffered in the detention center, and leading to intense crisis in their life. And not only in the individual stories, like how it affects the family, like because certain families are having, if we say, like both Bangladeshis and Indians in that sense, which is leading to kind of complete crisis in the familial settings. So I'm not going to the detail of it. There are a lot of case stories, like how this has impacted the families. Like there are cases of suicide, and we have, after NRC also, there are a number of cases of suicides when people are seen that they are not there in the list. So this is a kind of crisis that is going on in Assam. And finally, I would like to talk about the third aspect, like the deportability, because it's not just about detection and detention, but the question of possibility of being reported. So it's not about deportation per se, because I don't think there is any provision between India and Bangladesh actually to push or send to Bangladesh, right? It is rather we have to understand this as a condition which would help the political and economic interest of certain sections, because deportability is, for example, it helps the vote bank politics, consolidating the majoritarian nationalism. And in that sense, like for example, in the context of political or in the context of election, you can see that the political rhetoric comes into picture, that will send this huge number of Bangladeshis to their place. So this is about, it's more of a condition than a practice as such, which has serious implications among the population who are under the scanner of the state. So if one is about the political process of it, second is also about the economic aspect of it, like how deportability actually helps the under the neoliberal regime, how it helps the certain sections, because it's quite evident that how cheap this labor force is. Actually, the people who are from identified as Bengali speaking population, or who are from Bangladesh are actually available as cheap labor, not just in Assam. Now you can see their presence everywhere in the country. There are enough evidence to say that how their identity as this particular group is actually being a major factor in terms of their spatial segregations, economic exploitation, labor exploitation, and so on. And this is increasingly the case across the world, not just in Indian context. And therefore, I think it's important for us to understand deportability as a condition which marginalizes this section. And also, deportability in terms of its effect on the population is also equally important, because even if you are not detained or deported per se, you live with the fear of being detained or being deported, and this can be seen in terms of the kind of crisis or the trauma that people undergo, like especially families where people are identified as illegal migrant. The kind of crisis they undergo actually proves this fact. Finally, I would like to point about again the possibility of change, that it's not just that there is this static situation of one is identified as illegal migrant and they live with that. I mean, there are instances, at least from the history of detention centers, that, as I said, like people prove their citizenship even after that by fighting. And there are also legal fight going on. For example, in 2018, after some human rights activists filed a case, Supreme Court came with this verdict that you can't detain a person in detention center beyond 3 years if you're not able to send them back to Bangladesh, right? And there is no provision to send them back to Bangladesh. So on this ground, I think many people got then they were able to come out of the detention center. And as I said, there are many cases where people actually prove their citizenship. So there is also this fight going on, like there is this possibility of social change as well, given the fact that there is political activism and legal fight, which would actually bring certain kind of change in the scenario, or the kind of repressive measures that are going on in the contemporary time. I think I'll stop here and thank you so much.
Yeah, we can take a couple of questions, quick questions. Anybody can ask the question, please. One or two questions. Question can be asked, please. Panel is before you. You can just ask the question.
NRC and CJA as another worry to the minorities in India. So with that regard, I would like to ask you, see, in every country, mostly people go to Gulf and all, they don't get citizenship there, but they get a status, work permit. So in India, because of not such having such provision, people who come from other countries, they sneak into India, they try to get citizenship, and very, very easy because of the corruption. They immediately get the Aadhaar card also they can make. So now it has become a worry, not only for Muslims. Actually, most people who are opposing is Bengali, Assami Hindus. So they are thinking that not only Assami, Bengali Muslims, Bengali Hindus also they are opposing. Whoever is Bengali, because they are mostly they are impinging into the cultural rights of Assam and our cultural identity. So that is the question there. So my question to you is that you said there is a detention center and there is a citizenship. So if there is no via media where the citizens from other countries can be given work permit and they can see detention center is a burden on the state. You have to you treat them and all that the different thing, human rights issue. But again, you have to feed them and all that. So instead of that, you develop a mechanism where it's there in many countries like So where you have developed a mechanism where you are a citizen or you are an aligned worker, then you are a foreigner. You coming up with it. So in this situation, otherwise it is not a problem to Indian Muslims. The CJA is particularly not a problem. You see, in India, no country will invite everyone. It can have some conditions. So the worry is because it is being seen in context with the Assam. In Assam, it is happening. We are put in detention center. Is it possible to put people in Hyderabad into detention center? Absolutely no. Not possible. But only thing is this worry is spreading across and a false notion is being created. So a MANUU India can be suggested researchers like you. Where no these things can be packaged.
Any other question?
I have a question on
Please.
language.
Please.
Yes,
Please, please.
140 populated India. Sanskrit, only 24,000 people have enrolled. Our mother tongue is Sanskrit. Why Sanskrit is continuing as a second language in schools and colleges? The question is, the academicians should think about this.
Yeah.
And I have a question, one more question on culture. It is a diversified country and a multi-cultured country. Why the language is coming one nation, one culture is the question. How can we accept one culture? There are plenty of different cultures are in India.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
academicians should think and
Sure.
discuss about this issue.
Yeah.
Please. My question is to Professor Tanvir. Sir, you said that today we are living in times of constricted citizenship, where citizenship is closely connected with nationalism. So I just like you to elaborate on this. If nationalism is defined in, say, cultural or ethnic terms, we find that there is a backlash against what is seen as an imposed culture of, and in this imposed culture, you find that secularism or democratic institutions are all being attacked as imposed culture, and therefore we are now trying to redefine the nation and relations between communities in more organic terms. So, when you speak of, say, Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb, it is immediately associated with Nehruvian secularism. Or when you speak of developmental subject or the Sacha Committee report, one argues that this is again the post-colonial state intervening, but there's no real demand among the people. So it appears that the state and democracy are moving in different lines. So in this scenario, sir, how would you could you just elaborate on what is the resolution of the Muslim question today, when there's a backlash or democratic backsliding against everything that we've associated with till now, be it secularism or modernity, etc. Just one more question. Because Amirullah Khan Sahab said that the question of leadership among Muslims. So, how would you look at, say, Salman Khurshid? And would you argue that he's an elite, he can't win elections? Or would you instead say, if you look at the debate between him and, say, Kapil Sibal on the question of secularism, that no, he represents an important voice for the Muslims? And how would you look at Oasis?
Yeah. So, Tanvir sir ने कहा कि शिक्षा कमेटी रिपोर्ट ने मुस्लिम इश्यूज को डेवलपमेंट में फ्रेम किया, फिर उन्होंने लिफ्ट किया सिक्योरिटी का। आप अमिला सर ने कहा कि मुस्लिम का इश्यूज है सर्वाइवल का। इट मीन्स कि हम पार्टीशन से पहले मुस्लिम इंटर कर गए हैं सर्वाइवल के लिए, हम नेगोशिएट कर रहे हैं स्टेट के थ्रू, क्योंकि आज के टाइम में हम डिबेट कर रहे हैं एजुकेशन, हेल्थ, इंडिकेटर्स, लेकिन डिफरेंट कम्युनिटीज हैं, जैसे मान लीजिए और भी मार्जिनलाइज कम्युनिटी है, दलित हैं या शेड्यूल ट्राइब्स से, वो डेमोक्रेसी, हम 75 साल की डेमोक्रेसी में वो उनके इश्यूज मेरे इश्यूज डिफरेंट हो चुके हैं, क्योंकि हम सर्वाइवल के लिए इश्यूज कर रहे हैं, वो डेवलपमेंट के लिए इश्यूज कर रहे हैं। तो अभी क्या हो रहा है सर आज के सिस्टम में कि हम पहले क्या होता था कि हम कहते हैं कि पोलिटिकल इश्यूज हमारे साथ गवर्नमेंट काम नहीं कर रही, हम अपने इश्यूज को ले जाते, लेकिन क्या होता था कि हम जाते थे जुडिशरी के पास, तो जुडिशरी पर मीम बनने शुरू हो गए कि मुस्लिम का इश्यूज आया इसका मतलब माय लॉर्ड कुछ नहीं, अगर मुस्लिम है तो कुछ नहीं। अब क्या हो रहा है कि हमको ये शो किया जा रहा है कि अगर मोहन भागवत अगर वो मुसलमान के साथ डील कर रहे हैं, इट मीन्स वो शो कर रहे हैं कि अगर इफ यू वांट टू डील विद द स्टेट यू हैव टू डील विद मोहन भागवत एंड नागपुर। तो इस कंडीशनल फ्रेम में मुस्लिम अपने आप को किस तरह से अपने इश्यूज को, चैलेंजेस को डील करें?
Anything else? We can start conference. Mic did.
So small room. Yeah.
You can come in. You can come if you want.
No.
Mic did.
कोई आधा मिनट बोलना है?
Very brief. No, My point is, I don't think we can see it in the same fashion as we see people who go to Gulf or get work permit, etc. Because this is about borders and people who are moving across the borders historically. Not that people have come just 10, 20 years back and started working in Assam. If you look at the people who are detected or detained, you can see even 60, 70 years old people who have children there who live there for a longer time are being picked up. So it's the scenario is completely different. It's not like Gulf migration. It can't be compared in that way. And there has been historically relations between people across, and borders actually divided people right over a period of time. So I think that is crucial. Secondly, regarding the work, I mean, what one can witness is that after having a social life and familial life over a period of time, you actually take out the members from the family and put them in the detention centers or detect them and take away all their social life. So I think the scenario is much more complex, and it is not about giving a work permit to people yeah, I think that's my question.
Yeah, just to add that probably this, but I would say that CAA is extremely problematic. Maybe whether the Muslims accept it or not, but otherwise it goes contravies the constitution itself because it discriminates on the grounds of religion. Who will get citizenship, which Indian Citizenship Act of 1955 does not. So therefore, there is a deep, there is a question which is associated with the whole CAA project, and we know that how it is part of the majoritarian discourse. In the specific case of Assam as well, it reveals in terms of how it distinguishes between refugees and infiltrators. That is the kind of category which is operational in the politics there. Anyways, the question about resolution of Muslim question, developmental indicators, etc. What I was referring to basically is that today, as we see, that while if you compare it with the SCs, STs, etc., the question has gone beyond development itself. It is no longer simply development, but it's more about empowerment. That is the expectation which the SCs and the STs are not having from the Indian state. That the Muslim question is far behind even now. The Muslim question actually has receded. It went up to developmental question as a central question at one point of time, but then was very short-lived. And now we are again coming back to the whole idea about proving your loyalty, about security, about that. So we are going back to the 1950s, 40s, and even probably in the worst form. That's why I was saying there is a connect between the kind of nationalism which you have and the kind of citizenship which it produces. So every nationalism will have a connect with citizenship, but it depends on the nature of nationalism itself. So today's nationalism is definitely monochromatic, that kind of an idea. It reproduces in the citizenship notion which carries. Secularism, if you say, is a modern project, and therefore it is being argued that secularism has to be rejected altogether. But even in the Hindutva discourse, secularism is not shunned. They refer to others as pseudo-secular, which means they uphold secularism as a principle and would like to prove themselves more secular than others by discriminating against the minorities. But the whole idea is that no community as such should be, given a helping hand. And this is a difference-blind idea of secularism. However, it is a camouflage. We know that how it works ultimately. It works in terms of otherization. So that is the only.
मुस्लिम लीडरशिप मैं वो सवाल कर रहा हूँ आपसे कि भाई कौन है मुस्लिम आई डोंट नो आई मीन इस सलमान खुर्शीद डजंट कंसीडर हिमसेल्फ अ मुस्लिम लीडर तो वो ही इज एन इंडियन लीडर Asad Owaisi does consider himself as a Muslim leader and doesn't get elected in Bihar or UP or even Karnataka. So do we have a Muslim leader? That's the question. I'm throwing it at you. कि आखिर क्या कह सकते हैं उसके बारे में. The only problem I want to point out to everything is कि हमारे पास एक जो objectively हमको जिस पे करना चाहिए सोच और लिखना चाहिए वो ये कि हम अपने ऊपर भी नजर डालें तो we present a very sad situation. The example that we have set in Pakistan The example we are setting in Iran is a great thing. आपको हर चीज का justification मोदी सरकार के पास इस बात से मिल जाता है कि भाई ये तो पाकिस्तान में भी है, ये तो सऊदी अरब में भी है. This concept of citizenship, कौन आपको citizenship देता है सऊदी अरब में, कौन आपको अजान देने देता है. So if the definition of secular is different across different places, and if we present examples that are great benchmarks to use to justify what the country is doing, it will continue to do that.
Thank you very much for all the panelists, and they have done a justice to the topic, to what they have presenting. So what is very important to understand with the concept which he has given, that Tanveer Fazal has given about his the question, the Muslim question, how Muslim question he has tried to understand. And it's not only that he's a socialist and he's speaking the general student of India, they very well understand the position. We have to prove the loyalty. That is the most important question. When anytime you are going to ask that you prove your loyalty, despite the fact earlier it was not a question. Earlier it was not a question that you have to prove the question. You have to prove your loyalty. Now this has started. Then this point has to be taken care very seriously, not only by the academia, but in general masses. That is one point. The very question you have said, Mr. Bhagwat is coming to the madrasa, and that is being shown a very important good sign that he is coming to us. I don't consider it's a good sign. Why? Every time you are having a blame on madrasa, what madrasa is doing, where madrasa is doing. So all these things is just you are being marginalized by that particular to a particular community. That is one question. About the information provided by Dr. Amanullah Khan, I don't understand the data which you have given. I'm not arguing the data which you have given, but my personal observation is totally different than the data which you have given to me. You said in the first 40 years, the Muslim were in the second category, upper path, and then. And now after 14 years, we have a very low condition. The condition is slightly we have done it, we are backward. But if my own study, I have not studied in proper way in that way, but if we at least 10 or 20 villages have been shown to me by my own area, where I find that all the people who were living the 40 years back, their condition was economic condition, education much lower than the today which they have. Earlier, it was when you go and discuss with any person, they were having chappar ki chat. Now you hardly get chappar ki chat in a villages. And earlier, this is so जिनको आप अशराफ कहते थे, अशराफ के यहाँ भी फाके होते थे. I know अशराफ होते थे, but उनके यहाँ भी एक वक्त खाना नहीं बनता था. But there is no position to hardly get any people who are not getting food. I have food in at least in the Muslim community, which I have from there I have observed and where I have worked. So I don't find this type of thing. The condition has approached. I inquired one of the lady who was my relative. She was 80 years old that time. I said, what were the criteria of the rich people in our society, in our relative in early period? In your way, when you came to this village after marriage, she said only one thing: जिनके घर में 3 वक्त खाना बनता था, वो अमीर कहलाते थे. This was the statement given by one of my relatives. She was 80 years old that time when she has given. So the condition is of course improved. This is my general understanding. I don't know what. Regarding Dr. Saleh has given a very one aspect has been covered by him. What is the effect of the migrating community from Assam state? That is, NRC and CA was a great problem, not for the Assami people and all over India, particularly for the Muslim. I don't know whether you know or no, but this is a very correct word. Muslim in other part of the country started doing all their paperworks. They started getting their paper from different parts of the country. My grandfather land record, my grandfather mark sheet and all that. The many of people have collected the mark sheet of their grandfather because they don't have any land. So they can show that my grandfather has passed out from this university or this college or what. whatever. So this thing was going on. Regarding migration, the historian is also working on that, but the concept is different. Very recently, a young scholar, her name is Pallavi Chakravarti, just written on migration, but she's covering Calcutta and Delhi. Two cities have been covered by her, and that is in the migration from 1947 to 71. So that was the how migration affected to the community and the people. That has also been discussed by historians. Historians are also working in this manner. Of course, your work is totally different than the work which we have been doing, but we are trying to correlate the things, the question which you are going asked to us. We are also trying to correlate with our own subject where we can accommodate this thing. I think I'll stop here and thank you very much, Zia, and for giving me this opportunity to interact with such a good scholars. Thank you.
इससे बेहतरीन सेशन नहीं हो सकता था और मुझे कई लोगों ने कहा इंडिविजुअली कि किसी एक थीम पर पूरे दिन का सेशन रखना था. इमेजिन लाइक on the status of Dalits, on religious minorities, we could have at least half a day, but then in the first forenoon we could have 2 sessions on religious minorities and then previously on Dalits. मुझे उम्मीद है कि जो क्वेश्चंस हमने यहाँ रेज किया है, सॉल्यूशंस नहीं दिखे बट रेज किया, यही सबसे बड़ा चैलेंज है. और it was told in the previous session that raising question is more important today. So we exercised those powers. I thank Professor Tanveer Fazal, Professor Amirullah Khan, and Dr. Salah, who are very dear to us and have been very kind to accept our invitations on a very short notice. Young scholars के लिए है कि ये तीनों speakers की पहली ख्वाहिश ये होती थी और ये है कि वो 1 घंटा खुद अपनी डिस्कशंस को करेंगे, और इन तीनों ने 1 घंटे में हम सबके साथ अब इस तरह से जस्टिस किया है कि आई थिंक मुझे लगता है कि ऐसे सेशंस को हम बहुत कम सुन पाते हैं, ख़ास तौर से मौलाना आज़ाद नेशनल उर्दू यूनिवर्सिटी में. दानिश साहब हिस्टोरियन हैं. ग्रेजुअली मैं पर्सनली पिछले 4-5 महीनों में इनके अंदर सोशल साइंस के दूसरे सीट्स को देख रहा हूँ. आई वॉज फॉर्चुनेट टू be one of the panelists recently where I was talking on some occasions and he was chairing. I was very feared that historian हमारे सेशन को चेयर कर रहे हैं, लेकिन thanks to him that he was very courteous to me, and that makes that people who are not only in sociology, anthropology, economics do justice to research, but also people in other domains of social science research. They are bringing a lot of new nuances and questions. So with these, I thank all the panelists, the chair. Thank you all.